Hi, James.
Hey there, how's it going?
Great to see you. Thanks for joining. I'm going to give it
Sure.
a couple minutes. I can see you
Yeah.
great. Your audio is great. Uh, Great light
So
right there.
surprised this works. It works like 40% of the time, so you never know what's going to work and what's not going to, but it's our lucky
Great.
day.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you taking the time.
Of
Just going
course.
to give everyone a couple more minutes to join. I prepared a short little introduction so everyone gets to know you a little bit better.
Great.
And then I've kind of, got a plan. Hopefully, I would love for the plan to take 10 hours. I know you don't have 10 hours, so we'll try to make it as short and sweet and compact, full of information. I know everyone's excited. I think I mentioned to you, but I have some colleagues that I was telling about this book, and they already had read your other works, and they were so excited. So I know some people are going to be joining. I know DeRose is going to be joining us. Uh,
Wow.
so yeah, it should be great. So I'm excited. All right, so it's 5 o'clock. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you, if you don't mind. I'm going to take a lot of the information that I have here that I learned myself from your website. So you guys can find James online. If you type in James Nestor, you can also find him on Instagram. He's got a great website. So I really want everyone to go out and follow him because I know there's going to be tons of material coming out more and more as people interview you more, as people read the book more. And so hopefully everyone can continue to follow everything that you're doing. And I know I personally am very excited to see where this goes for you. So for those that are here, James is a journalist who's been writing for Outside Magazine, New York Times, The Atlantic, Scientific American, Men's Journal, Surfer's Journal, which is one of my childhood favorites, I have to say. So grew up reading that. He's living in San Francisco, and he spent the past few years researching his recent release book called Breath: The Lost Art of the Lost Art and Science of Breath. Right. So um, recently, James, I want to congratulate you first of all for reaching the bestseller list in New York Times, L.A. Times. That's a huge achievement. I know your life has been really busy as a result of it. Um, so I'd like to get this started by saying welcome, congratulations, and asking you, how does it feel since the book was released with all of this noise, all of these good, the good bestseller list? How does it feel?
Completely surreal because when you're working on a book, you're working in a vacuum. You're working alone at a desk. And I wasn't sure anyone would be as fascinated with this stuff as I've been. And so many of the researchers and scientists I talked to, they've been working on this stuff for 30, 40 years, and no one's really been listening to them. So I think they're as shocked as I am to see their research, come to light in a lot of ways. And I'm only a conduit to what they've done. I'd have nothing to write about if it weren't for these people who were really doubling down and trying to find the hidden mechanisms in breathing and just how impactful that is for our brain and body.
That's true. I identify with everything that you just said because myself, I've been teaching breathing for almost 15 years, 14 years, in fact, and that is one of the things that people come to us with almost zero knowledge. And one of the things that I often ask people is, everyone has an idea of what healthy eating looks like, what it is, what to do. Everyone understands that we need to be drinking water, but if I were to ask any random person on the street, what does healthy breathing look like? They would look at me a little strange, right? So everyone has an opinion about healthy eating, about drinking liquids, but when it comes to breath, people know so little they don't have an opinion, and today that's rare for someone not to have an opinion about anything or about something such as breath. I wanted, I read your book. I have a copy here. I listened to the Audible, so I got to listen to you, your voice. So that was great. Everyone needs to go out and get the book. And I really, really enjoyed the book. Everything, I read it in just a couple days, even working full time. Some of us are working more now with the quarantine, in fact. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about the revelation that you came into when you're researching this book, about how breathing is really a pillar of health, as you mentioned it, or as you called it in your book. How did you come to that realization? And if you could tell us a little bit about your journey to that conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Well, echoing just what you had said, a lot of people know what foods are healthy, what foods aren't healthy. A lot of us know that exercising makes us healthier. It's going to increase longevity. But you can eat the right foods. You can exercise all you want. You can have the best genes. But if you are not breathing correctly, you're never, ever really going to be healthy. And this is something that I had no idea was correct. And until I started talking to these people and learning how breathing, it's something we do 20,000 times, 25,000 times a day. A lot of us never, ever think about it. But by harnessing those breaths, I, in my opinion, and from the opinion of many of the researchers I worked with, this is as important, if not more important, than those two other pillars of health. And our awareness to it has just really gone to the wayside for the past 100 or so years, maybe even longer than that. Even though this was a foundation of health, breathing was a medicine for cultures for thousands and thousands of years. And so I find it's fascinating. Now we have instruments to measure this stuff, and we're finding out what so many people had said for so long is actually correct.
Yeah, that's so true, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that was another piece that you touched on in your book, about the history of this art, of this lost art. History that, as you mentioned, goes back thousands of years. And I would say the longer we have to research the history, the further back it goes. We don't know how far back this goes, but I think at least 5,000 years is the number that I've been familiar with, and I've found. And 5,000 years ago, you mentioned civilization Mohenjo-Daro, which is something that's really familiar to those who study the DeRose method. It's something that Professor DeRose has been teaching as the legacy from which we get all of these, not just the art of breathing, but also the art of meditation, and many, many, many interesting things that you mentioned in your book. This civilization in the Mohenjo-Daro had advanced engineering methodologies that they were using for public health. But it wasn't just science. The arts, they found artifacts of children's toys. They found seals to communicate. They were very successful with trade. They were successful with architecture. They had two-story housing with private, bathrooms. And the bathroom would have plumbing to take it outside of the house. They had public baths. If there was whatever governance they had, it's not very clear, but what is clear is that there wasn't a high ruling class and a lower class. So I think it's very different than what we've been accustomed to reading about in history books, and something that we can be inspired by, not just because of the art of breath, but to understand that this civilization, for them to develop this art of breath, they were also developing many other areas of their civilization in coordination. And I think that's an incredible story. I don't know if there was anything in particular regarding that civilization that caught your attention or that surprised you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had always learned in school that evolution was the straight line forward, right? We're just progressing always. Survival of the fittest. We're getting better and better and better. That's complete BS. The human body in and of itself for the past 500 years has really taken a downturn. And our breathing has taken a downturn as well, because all of this morphological change that has occurred in our faces due to industrialized food. And this isn't some fringe conspiracy theory. This has been studied at Harvard. It's been studied by Robert Corcini for 30 years. He's 200 papers on this stuff. So it's fact. It's scientific fact. And so whenever we think of cultures as well, we always think, well, this culture is, of course, going to be so much more better than the last one because we're progressing in time. There's this chronology of progress. But what you've learned from the Indus Valley and so many other cultures is they had extremely evolved technologies. They had an evolved culture. There were no, according to what archaeologists have found, there were no governmental buildings. There were no religious buildings. I mean, imagine if we didn't have all of that, how much more time we could spend on the science of human health. So what I found that just kept happening is this discovery of breathing and these techniques would just pop up in these cultures throughout time, throughout the last several thousand years. Even though these cultures wouldn't be in contact with one another, they still found the same stuff. Like in the Chinese Tao, there's 7 books dedicated 100% to breathing. What happens when you do it poorly? All the bad things. What happens when you do it correctly? So to continue to follow that back, like I thought it stopped with the Tao. I thought 1,500 years, that's a long time to be studying breathing. But then I was introduced to DeRose and his research and his work, and learning that you have to go back thousands of years even before that to find the true foundations here.
Yeah, and you'll find that meditation and breathing, which is one of our specialties, meditation, among many other techniques, breathing is a key factor because breath has been used for thousands of years, as you implied, as a bridge between the conscious and the subconscious. It's a physiological activity that we can modify. I don't know if any other animals can do that, but we can modify just because we want to. So with every state of consciousness, there is a rate of breathing, there's a way of breathing, there's a rhythm, there's a pace of breath for every state of consciousness and vice versa. So with our breath, we can change in a way that's subconscious, and that would happen if, if something surprises us and scares us, that fight or flight syndrome. But we also have the ability to hack in and change how we're breathing. Once we've observed the scenario, once we've gotten the context, we can then react in a way that's more thoughtful and maybe more productive than some kind of subconscious automated behavior. And so that's really powerful. This link between the conscious present state, being aware, being focused of what's going on, and these subconscious kind of automated behaviors and activities that so many are physiological and we take for granted as being just who we are. So that's...
We've been told for so long that the autonomic nervous system is autonomic as in automatic, as in beyond our control. And just until recently, this was the popularly held belief in medicine. But we've learned that we can absolutely control our nervous system. We can do it by breathing. We may not be able to control the way our heart functions with just our mind. I mean, some yogis can. We can't control our liver and our stomach, but by breathing, we can influence all of these different functions and take control. And this was something I thought was so fascinating, is that link between unconscious, subconscious thought and conscious thought, and attaining those connections through breathing. I was interested in the science of this, not so much my own subjective experience, and learning what happens, this profound physiological effect that happens to us when we breathe in these certain ways, that elicits that access. Certain areas of the brain are shut off, others are turned on. And I was just talking to Andrew Huberman, who is a researcher at Stanford, and he's doing a ton of work now looking at breathing and nervous system function and immune function. And there's an absolute link. And I don't think we could have been saying this 5 years ago. And how exciting is that,
Yeah, it's very exciting to have the science kind of backing up the things that those who have been teaching breathing for a while, much longer than myself, DeRose, obviously, and everyone that's been studying and working and being trained by him. It's really nice to have the backing of science. And I will add that when I start talking to my students, ever since we met a few years ago in 2017, I've been telling my students, wait for this book. You're going to like it. It's going to be exciting. And one of the things that I noticed they responded to, which I was very grateful to you because you brought this to my attention, was how breathing incorrectly can change the structure of the jaw. And I would tell my students, guys, it's really important that you breathe through the nose. When you breathe through the nose, the temperature is humidified in this chamber. It's given moisture. It's essentially given the right conditions so that when it reaches the lungs, you can absorb the most energy possible. And it also encourages you to breathe slow because it's a smaller chamber than the mouth. So there's a whole bunch of reasons and how that can impact the immune system. Most of them just kind of looked at me with glazed over eyes and were like, John, going on one of his rants again. But when I mentioned that the structure of their face can start to deform, everyone's eyes opened up and they leaned in a little closer and they got more interested. So thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah, and the nose is one of those things that everyone considers it ancillary because we've got a mouth. It's like people say, well, why do we have a mouth then if we're not supposed to breathe out of it? Look at any wild animal, any animal, and it's going to be breathing through it. Look at a horse when it's running as fast as it can, nasal breathing. The only time you're going to see a horse with its mouth open is when it's sick or when it's going to die. So if you were to take something about the size of my fist, shove it in the middle of your face, that's how many sinuses, that's how much space we have inside of our heads. This is not there randomly. And if you were to cut it in half, it would look just like a seashell. And different crustaceans use their shells to keep pollutants out, to keep particulate out. That's exactly what the nose does. So I had worked with the chief of rhinology research at Stanford for months and months, and he was like, there's 27 departments at the National Institutes of Health. There's one on liver, one on the stomach, one on the lungs. None are looking at nasal breathing and breathing. But what happens here affects everything else down below. So that the fact that the ancients knew about, I mean, there's this Chinese quote that says, breath inhaled from the mouth is called adverse breath. Never breathe from the mouth. That's 1,200 years ago. It's about time we start listening to that stuff.
So tell me a little bit. I loved how in the final chapter you introduce the person in the final chapter of you arriving to Sao Paulo, which is a pretty unsuspecting city for someone like myself that comes from a suburban town, and myself from Texas. But even here, living in New York, I think Sao Paulo can really surprise people with its immensity, with its activity. And it's DeRose's favorite city in the world. Tell me a little bit about that contact with DeRose. How did it go as far as, I know a mutual friend was the initial recommendation to connect with DeRose. So how was it that you decided to travel to Brazil and meet DeRose, and how did that encounter go?
Mm-hmm. When you research a book, you talk to absolutely everyone, and about 2% of the people you talk to actually make it into the book. That's just the process, right? So I was talking to hundreds and hundreds of people. So whenever someone mentions something, it's like, hey, this guy's really doing interesting stuff, or this lady over here is doing interesting. I check them out thoroughly to see if it's something that can fit into the book that I will want to research further. And I was shocked when I first heard about DeRose's research because I'd never heard of any of this. I'd heard about the Indus Valley civilization a little bit, but didn't know much about it. And so, before that interview, and especially after, I talked to experts in the field of yoga, anthropology, archaeology, and what they told me was exactly in line with what DeRose had told me about the Indus Valley civilization. And so that I wanted to, it's one thing to talk to people over email, another thing to talk to them via phone and Instagram, but it's another thing to see them operate in their own way. Nothing beats face-to-face conversations. So it just seemed like this was an interesting enough story, interesting enough angle. The history I thought was so fascinating. I wanted to hear more about his perspective and hear how he got interested in it. I said, what's this Brazilian guy doing, spending 30 years and flying back and forth to India? What was his interest in it? What kept him so intrigued for so long? And I thought that story was very interesting. And the fact that, again, so much of what he was saying, I fact-checked all of this against experts in the field, and it was all lining up. And I thought that was, I also saw, a bit of a reporter in his, here's someone who was extremely curious about a subject who just kept going at it until he figured it out. And I'd like to think on my better days, that's how I like to approach research, is just keep going until you really figure out the truth behind all of it.
That's cool. I agree. I mean, just to take a moment to think about what DeRose has done, I think it's important, partly because you mentioned it in the book, partly because he's, my teacher. He's the person who taught me about breathing, and the way that he taught it is what drew me in, right? I mean, so DeRose, like you said, this is going to be 60 years for him teaching. And so, like you said, he's been traveling the world, specifically going and researching this art of breath that's linked with the art of meditation, as well as the art of other facets that originally, based on what I understand, these things kind of emerged or rose together because they support each other, right? If you can't control your breath, you're not going to be able to meditate. And so all of these things, yeah. Were you going to say something?
I completely agree with that. And that's what a psychologist, neuropsychologist at Laureate Institute of Brain Research was telling me. He said the immediate benefits of meditation are how you breathe, right? You can't go in and meditate and the first thing of any meditation is slowing down. And that right there has such a profound effect on your body, and it acclimates your mind for going into some deeper space.
Yeah. And over those 60 years, DeRose, in his work, the treaties, it hasn't been translated to English yet, but it's in Portuguese, and we're working on the translation. I'm working on it personally with him, as well as a translation group. But in that book, there's 54 breathing techniques that an instructor or a student who buys the book can follow along and go from step one, and it graduates you all the way through. And it's really impressive because in each of those techniques, it's going to have a different lesson. There's a very core selection of these breathing exercises in that book that you're going to use on a daily basis. Some of them are just merely to be familiar and know about them, or they prepare you for the next breathing exercise. So there's 54 breathing exercises that have been used for thousands of years. But also one thing that I think is interesting that's gained a little more popularity in the past few years are the rhythms of breath. So there's quite a few rhythms of breath, and we use rhythms that are not improvised. These are rhythms that have been tested, put through the fire for thousands of years. And at the end of our conversation, I want us to practice one of them that I think is really powerful. And so I think and this was DeRose's lifetime work, was going back and finding and putting the pieces together, essentially a puzzle piece, putting it together for 60 years. And what he has found, in the past, I'd say 10 years, there was a shift in his work. And that main shift was to go from teaching these ancestral techniques almost exclusively, and shifting and noticing that the techniques themselves are not enough to get the end result that these ancient philosophies are proposing with the techniques, such as more elevated states of consciousness or just being present, to be honest. So this big shift in context was that he came to the realization that the way that our habits, our attitudes, our behaviors, the way that we treat each other, the way that we treat ourselves is foundational. For example, with the breathing exercise, and you mentioned this in this chapter when you talk to DeRose, you talk about this vital energy that in Sanskrit is called prana. And so when you study this, the pranic body, the body through which this prana energy moves in the human body, one of the revelations that DeRose came to, through his research, is that sometimes bad attitudes like hate, extreme kind of dense negative feelings can leave residue in this subtle energetic body. And so you can do all the breathing exercises you want. You can do all of the practices, the body techniques, the meditation. But when you stop those techniques and you go out into the real world and you fight with everybody, you're constantly intoxicating your own organ, endotoxins, right? Your own organism is what I meant to say. Sorry. You end up obstructing these channels through which prana or vital energy flows, and that can impact the result. What we eat impacts the ability of us to truly experience what the techniques can provide. So I found that to be really revolutionary, to say the techniques, all of this is great. It's going to improve health. You're going to see some level of benefits, but who asks, when it comes to these types of ancient traditions, the benefits that most people are talking about end up being very, very minor compared to the end result that they can achieve if they address the big picture of being a human being. If we try to treat each other better, if we have healthier emotions, more emotional intelligence, right, more mental health, and all these other things, as well as eating well, as well as exercising. If we can do all of this together in a sustainable way, we're going to get much further than if we just hone in on the techniques and try to become experts on the techniques. So to me, that's one of the biggest contributions that DeRose had as far as insights, because it's really easy to focus on the technique. It's really easy to focus on how great meditation is or how great breathing is. But when we stop doing these techniques, we go out and we're miserable, then it's not going to work as well as it could if we're able to re-educate or kind of reprogram ourselves to be exactly who we want to be, because so often we're a result of the things that we're absorbing as we grow up, right? The lessons, the information, what our culture teaches us ends up being how we interact. It influences how we interact with the world. And so for me, that the way that you ended the book was incredible, saying that science, in my opinion, my interpretation was that science got us this far. This is what we know from science, but there's still something else that we haven't fully discovered yet. And I think that something else includes how our feelings, how our emotions, how our mental health, and how our relationships impact how those techniques such as breathing well work. I don't know if you felt the same way or if you could add something to that.
Yeah, science isn't a closed book, Science doesn't stop. Medical science doesn't stop once a book is published, even though that's what a lot of people think. I mean, if you look at the history of science, especially medical science, a doctor told me this. He said, if you look at the past, 50 to 70% of what we thought we knew was going to help us did not help us or hurt us in the past. And right now, 50 to 70% of what we think we know is helping us is either not helping us or is hurting us right now. So that's not a very good track record, right? So I think you need to look at just as you said, the body holistically, not in these silos. Oh, I got my eating down, I'm going to be fine. I exercise, I can eat whatever I want. No, of course you have to look at the whole thing. And just as I was researching and talking to doctors and scientists, just a few decades ago, we were told that we couldn't expand our lung capacity. They said that's impossible. We were told that we couldn't develop our diaphragm. We were told that we couldn't gain more bone in our bodies after the age of 30. So all of these things are false. We know that the human body is capable of so much more than what we've been told it was for the past 100 years. And that's talking to the people who have managed to either blunt the symptoms of their conditions or outright heal them has been so inspiring. And they've used breathing as the pillar to attack autoimmune problems, to attack asthma, and they have measured benefits from this. It's not just subjective, it is documented data.
Right. That's incredible. So, and yeah, I mean, to me, I feel like that's huge. I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to share with our viewers, our listeners. Before we go to the techniques, anything that you feel from the book that you want, a message that you want to get out to your readers or listeners today?
I think the main message, and something that I learned, was that we all have a lot of problems with breathing now. These are caused by industrial foods, our faces caving in, our faces growing flat, mouth breathing. So we know this. But what I think we don't realize is our bodies have been injured in this way, but they can also heal themselves in some really miraculous ways. I wrote about this woman in Germany at the beginning of the 1900s who had scoliosis. She was told to sit in bed or roll around in a wheelchair the rest of her life, and she managed to stretch and breathe her straight, you know. And another guy who helped cure people of emphysema. I mean, maybe not cure, but they experienced extreme benefits from just by breathing in different ways. So the body's malleable. It can change for the better or for the worse. And if you adopt the right habits, you can do a lot of good for it.
And I noticed we also got a question that was asking, is it recommendable to breathe through the nose even while running? James, I don't know, maybe with your experience or your conversation with scientists, you could give us some.
So I'm not a breathing therapist. I'm not a doctor, but I learned a few tricks talking to these people for years and years and years. And one of them is absolutely breathe through your nose when you're running. It's going to be really hard to do this for a lot of people at the beginning, but the nose is just like any other muscle, okay? The less you use it, the less you're going to be able to use it. The more you use it, the more it's going to open up. And I know this because down at Stanford, which I'm so lucky to live so close to Stanford, and they're doing amazing research, the doctor of breathing, speech-language pathology found that within 2 months to 2 years, of her patients who had laryngectomies, their noses completely blocked. And she was a mouth breather. She had very poor breathing habits, and she found just by force of will, by adopting healthy habits, you can open up that nose. So just a few benefits of nasal breathing while you're running. You're going to get 20% more oxygen breathing through your nose than through your mouth. You're going to save 40% more moisture, so you're going to be a lot less thirsty and a lot less chance of becoming dehydrated. You're going to be able to recover a lot faster. I mean, there's a laundry list. It's all in the book, but that person who asked the question might want to check out the work by Dr. John Duyar. Did a ton of research into performance and nasal breathing.
Can you say the name of the author of that book again?
Sure. His last name is Douyllard. John is his first name. He has a book called Body, Mind, Sport, which I think your audience would really dig. He was adopting a bunch of ancient methods because he was training triathletes and ultra runners and tennis stars and basketball stars. And his research into nasal breathing of the performance benefit, once you get there, a lot of people tried for a couple of days. They said, there's no way I'm doing this. I can't do it. You got to stick with it. The benefits have been documented for 30 years. I did see one notice here. We just sold Brazilian rights, Portuguese rights. So that is about 3 days ago. So the book will be coming out in Brazil in about 7 or 8 months.
That's incredible news. Congratulations. I guarantee you're gonna sell a lot of copies in Brazil. That I'm very confident of. And we had another question. Maybe you could help us answer that. Is breathing the main source of energy? We have water, we have solid food, we have air, right, through breathing. So what does your research tell us about that?
When you break down what energy is on atomic level, even a subatomic level, you're talking about electrons, and you're talking about the production of ATP. So we need glucose and we need oxygen. You can't burn fat without oxygen. So the idea that, these people, when they're working out, huffing and huffing, the more you breathe, the less oxygen is going to be detaching from hemoglobin. People, so slower breaths, you're getting more oxygen. I know this is so counterintuitive. This is why meditation practices, all about slowly breathing. Then if you want to turn on, you can do some very vigorous pranayamas. But you're not breathing pranayama 24/7, right? You're doing that for about 20 minutes until you return to slow breathing. So I was curious about the same question. I was like, well, where does energy really come from, right? And you have to keep following it down from the molecular level to the cellular level to the subatomic level, and it comes down to electrons and the desaturated state of electrons. And the way that electrons become desaturated, I won't bore you with all this quantum, factoids here, but the way that they become desaturated is through oxygen. Oxygen is this fantastic desaturator, which allows life to have more energy and to do more, which is why aerobic life evolved so quickly as opposed to anaerobic life without oxygen was around for 1 billion years on Earth, not doing anything. Then aerobic life sprouted up and we just took off, and now here we are, 2 billion years later. So
that's incredible. And I remember a part that I liked, an analogy that you used in the book when talking about this specifically, was how breathing can help keep the body from rusting. The body is like all material, it's rusting and we are rusting. So with breathing, we are slowing down that process. I really appreciated that analogy. I liked it a lot.
So cancer takes root in areas of, guess what? Low oxygen. That's where it takes root and grows. So if you want to help your body avoid cancer, you're going to want to oxygenate your tissues as much as possible. You don't want them to go anaerobic. And this is known science, right? So what happens when people get stressed out is their sympathetic nervous system switches on and cuts off blood flow to other organs to send it to the brain, to send it to the heart, so you're ready to fight or flight, right? But you want those organs to stay in balance. You want them to be getting oxygen and circulation. So this is another reason why tuning into that parasympathetic state is extremely beneficial. You don't want these organs to go without blood flow, because again, that's where cancer is going to be taking root. And there's so much research being done in this with ketogenic diets to get rid of glucose in the diet and use ketones instead, because they're allowing everything to work in a much more efficient way. So it's fascinating stuff, and I have a feeling I'm going to be writing about some of that in the next couple of years. So
great. So now I think if we don't have any more questions, or I didn't see any more questions right now, I think we should go to our practice, if you guys are ready. I'm going to say let's practice for 5 minutes, and the idea is to go through first nasal breathing in and out through the nose. So I want everyone to sit comfortably if you're watching. I invite you to sit comfortably with the back straight, and you can keep the eyes open or close the eyes. I prefer to close the eyes, but since I'm going to be guiding you through it, I'm going to keep my eyes open. You're welcome to do as you choose. So I want you to explore breathing through the nose, and I want you to first notice the pace. Notice the pace that you are inhaling and exhaling. Once you identify the pace, I want you to try to breathe a little bit slower. Maybe you are already breathing slow, maybe not. Try to breathe slower than you were when you first began. The next step, I want you to guide the air into the lower section of the lungs, which is going to produce eventually an expansion of the abdomen. One thing that helps is to place the hands over the abdomen, but you don't need to. If the hands are on the abdomen, when you inhale, the air flows down to the lower section. You let the abdomen relax and expand outward. As you continue to inhale, the rib cage dilates laterally, and finally the chest will rise as you fill into that upper section. So 3 sections, lower, middle, and upper. Fill from the bottom up, and when you exhale, I want you to exhale from the top down. So you'll release from the upper, then middle, finally lower. The abdomen pulls in when you exhale. So when the air goes in, the abdomen goes out. And when the air exits, the abdomen pulls in. When you breathe in, let the air fill first into the lower section of the lungs, causing the diaphragm to drop, pushing the abdomen out. Then the rib cage easily dilates laterally, and finally the chest rises. So try to go through a few cycles. Some of you are going to be very familiar with this. Probably have a few instructors here that do this on a normal basis. But I want you to enjoy the simplicity. Whether it's familiar or not, it can be pleasurable. And I want you to make sure that the breath is pleasurable, that it's a source of pleasure. For me, one analogy that I always appreciated was when I eat food that I really enjoy, I want more. I close my eyes and I want to feel every sensation. So I want you to try to do that. Associate your breath with energy, with vitality, with health, with well-being. So as you inhale, try to notice the sensations that occur when you breathe and make sure those sensations are pleasurable. If at any time during our practice it's not pleasurable, then take a step back and just try to breathe slowly and deeply, because in a couple seconds we're going to add a rhythm that could make it a little more sophisticated, maybe more challenging. Priority is not to have some advanced rhythm. The priority is for it to be pleasurable. If you can sustain pleasure, then we'll make it more sophisticated. So the next step is we're going to use the rhythm 1, 2, 3. So the rhythm is the unit. You're going to add a unit of time, let's say 4 seconds. And we're going to multiply the unit of time by the numbers of the rhythm. The first number is always the inhalation. The second number is always a retention with air. The third number is always the exhalation. And if there were a fourth number, which we're not going to use today, it would be a retention without air. So anytime you hear one of our teachers mention one of these rhythms, it could be 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2. There are others. Today, 1, 2, 3. You're going to inhale in a unit of time that's pleasurable for you. So let's say 4 seconds. You're going to hold for 8. Exhale in 12. So again, pleasure. If that feels a little uncomfortable for you to reach the end of the exhalation in 12 seconds, try 3. Try to inhale in 3, hold 6, exhale in 9. So we're going to take a few moments. I want you to try to explore that technique. Each of these phases has a unique impact on the body, as you can imagine and you can feel. So I want you to feel the sensations and notice what sensations are different during the inhalation, what sensations are unique to the retention with air, and what sensations are unique to the exhalation. The inhalation is clearly a moment that you're absorbing like a sponge the vital energy in the atmosphere around you. We're like fish in water, surrounded by vital energy. For the most part, we don't have any idea how much true volume of vital energy there is around us at all times. So when you breathe, there is no way you can imagine you're absorbing more energy than you actually are. So use your mental creativity and really take notice of how you're absorbing large volumes of vital energy, or prana. As you hold your breath, take a moment to feel that prana becoming more potent. It's being dynamized. You continue to absorb, and it's becoming more potent, more dynamized, more energetic. The movement is becoming more potent. When you exhale, the energy begins to distribute again to every cell of the body. And the body also uses that exhalation to recycle back into the atmosphere any byproducts that the body didn't use. So continue for a couple more minutes, focusing on this process of inhaling. And I encourage you to use mental images, create mental images of this vital energy that is luminous. The energy that we're referring to originates with the sun. So it's convenient to imagine these small energetic particles of energy that have the luminescence that reminds you of the sun. So when you inhale and you absorb, every cell of the body is being impacted. And when you exhale, the body perfectly distributes, and the body recycles any byproducts back into the atmosphere. Inhale in 1 unit of time, filling first the lower section, middle, finally upper, holding the air for twice the amount of time. And when you exhale, release in 3 multiples of that unit of time. So again, as an example, if you're just joining, inhale, in 4 seconds, hold, retain the air in the lungs for 8, and exhale in 12. The unit of time is not the most important. So the most important relationship is not how long the unit of time is. The most important thing right now is the relationship between the inhalation, the retention of air, and the exhalation. Each of these phases have an influence on the organism, on the state that you are in. The exhalation is going to emphasize the passive, relaxed state. If you preserve the relationship or the rhythm, you'll preserve the impact. The unit of time is secondary, and it's essential that it be pleasurable. If it is not pleasurable, if you start to feel a little bit of discomfort, you will annihilate the impact of the technique instantly. Perceive the state shifting as you practice this breathing technique. Conscious, deep, rhythmic breathing exercise. Creating mental images for the internal processes that are occurring, how you absorb, and how that energy is put to work for greater health, well-being, and optimal function of the body, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And now, we're going to begin to close this practice. As you exhale, you finish your exhale without interrupting. Complete the technique, preserving the rhythm. And after the exhalation, we'll complete the practice. Great. And so first of all, James, I wanted to, before we conclude our live stream, I wanted to just let you know it's a huge honor for me, but really I'm speaking for all of us. I'm speaking for DeRose. I'm speaking for our whole team here, the entire DeRose network. We're really excited to have you with us. We're really excited about what you're bringing, the attention you're bringing to breath. You're making our lives easier. So really, really appreciate that work. I think personally that breathing can be one of the next big contributions to overall health for society as a whole. And I think you would agree.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. You know, as I said at the beginning of the talk, I would have nothing to write about if interesting people weren't doing interesting stuff and doing real research. So it's a real pleasure. And it's ironic that for the past couple of weeks, the book's just been out for a couple of weeks. You know, I'm doing 4 or 5 interviews a day. I don't get to sit down and focus on breathing much anymore. To be able just to step back and have someone else take the reins, that was really nice. So thank you for that.
Great. So, well, thank you very much. It's been a great honor again, and thank you for taking the time. I know you're super busy, and it's really cool. Really happy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we're going to try to upload this to YouTube. So if you know of any family, friends that would be interested in this topic, stay tuned to the YouTube channel so they can get all of this valuable information that James is bringing to us, and they make sure to also get the book. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Audible. It's available. I don't know if there are any other places that we can find your book. It's going to be available in Portuguese soon.
Local indie shops, you can buy it there as well. Support those guys. So it's available all over the place now. So
great.
All
right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, James.
Appreciate it. Okay.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.